Welcome back, everybody, to the A Little Less Fear podcast, the Dr. Lino Show. I would love to welcome today Tim Bowie. Tim Bowie had his first transcendental meditation experience at the age of 13. Since then, he's been a disciple under the greatest Buddhist masters of our time. He's been initiated under the Dalai Lama and other top-tier cultivators of the world and has been trained in foundational up through the highest yogic tantras. He's a flow state coach, which focuses on helping purpose-driven high performers excel. He uses evidence-backed methodologies to facilitate alignment to client vision and goals to make them easily attainable, eliminating burnout and procrastination and imbalance. Welcome to the A Little Less Fear podcast, Tim.
Thank you for having me. And that was a really powerful intro. Wow.
Hey, it's your power. This is your light. This is your light and your power. I'm just feeling your energy here. Thanks so much for being on the show. This is a motivational podcast, and I'm interested in knowing your journey to where you are at today. What brought you to this incredible journey?
I think it was undeniable. You know, my birthday is my social security number. No, I'm just kidding. My birthday is 8888. And so I've always, for some weird reason, taken significance in that. And I think in my culture, 8 is a really lucky number. It's a sideways infinity and it just means abundance. And I thought that was just a really beautiful way to come into this world as I look back. And I've always just taken significance in the stars.
Did you say 8888?
Yeah.
Oh, I see that number a lot. Whenever I see 888, I'm like, what does this mean? What does this mean? So, and I have seen the infinity, but go on. This is fascinating.
Yeah. So I just have this connection with, you know, astrology, the Chinese zodiac, and, you know, my birthday. And I look at all the houses that I'm in, and it's just a very interesting combination of things. And for me, I think as long as I can remember, it's always been a quest for significance. Recently, it's slightly shifted, but it's always been a quest for historical significance. And I think part of that is like this foundation that my parents set up for me, I think, in spirituality, because they are also Buddhist. I didn't really, it wasn't my path, you know, it was just something that was kind of just there. But later on, as I studied all the religions, you know, I basically minored in religions and philosophy. And so on that explorative journey, I decided to study Buddhism under some really ridiculously amazing people. And honestly, I think it's chosen me. To long story short, it's chosen me, and I'm just living it. That's really the simple of it. Yeah.
I have a question about that. How did you know it chose you? Were you pushed to it? Did you feel a pull to it? Was it more of an intuition, or was it a longing?
It was many of those things. It was definitely a longing for something more. Since having a transcendental experience since I was such a young age, I think one of the things that it left me with was questions about why did life feel so disconnected from my transcendent experience? Why was this experience so complete and so full, yet when I returned, it was just a mere like atoms of what I had experienced, not just in the 5 senses or the 6 senses, but really just in the totality of the experience in relationship with people. Like I had in this moment a relationship with everything and anything and all at once. And then here it's like very separate. I'm me, you're you, we have our opinions, and like it's just a very limited experience. And so that leads to the other part, which is like that made me deeply curious about, well, what is the nature of reality? Why I'm here? What's the nature of life? And then, you know, because my parents had books on Buddhism, I remember one, it was just talking about how Buddhism is not just a teaching, it's not just a lifestyle, it's not just a philosophy, it's like the Dharma is all encompassing. And then it talked about attachment and all these things. And at the age that I think it was like 8 or 9 when I read this book, I was like, okay, so attachments are bad. I'm just going to be completely unattached to everything. If this plate breaks, I'm not attached to it. Yeah. And so like that was kind of how I raised myself growing up. I mean, my parents weren't perfect, for sure. Very, 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 very far from that. But I think just having these sort of eye-opening experiences led me to not be able to take an easy path or look back on what life could have been like, because I was kind of just thrust into it. I basically I mean, we'll get into the story of what happened and how that transcendental first experience happened, but I didn't really ask for it. It just happened on its own.
Yeah, tell us about it. So you were 13 years old and it was a transcendental meditation experience. How did that happen? And what happened?
Yeah, so literally I just Googled how to meditate. I was like 12-ish, and I don't know why. I don't know but
You were just called to do it.
yeah, and so I Googled it, and then it taught me this style called Zazen meditation. And it's a Zen Buddhist style
I'm sorry, what was it
meditation.
called?
Zazen meditation.
Oh, Dazen meditation.
Yeah, and so essentially you're just breathing and counting breaths. And then
Okay.
it gets simpler and simpler. And for me in this meditation, after like maybe the second or third time that I tried it, I went to this point where, so I'll describe to you the meditation. You just breathe in through your nose and then out through your mouth, and then you count. That's one breath. And then as you progress to 10, you just reset back to one. And then when you get sort of automatic with it, then you challenge yourself to the next level, which is in, out, that's one. And then you go to 10 and then you reset. So it's sort of a self-corrective mechanism, because when you go past 10, you know you weren't fully focused. You weren't really there. And what's interesting is the relationship between the breath and the presence. And what happened for me was I realized that my consciousness became literally just the breath because of how focused I was. And it was just all of my consciousness was just focused on the feeling of the breath and it entering and exiting. And little by little, I started breathing less and less and less. And it was just a little bit in and a little bit out. And then slowly it was almost even. And then slowly I just felt like I stopped breathing. Like I just didn't need to breathe anymore. And I had this, as soon as that happened for, I don't know how long it happened for, but I just stopped breathing. As soon as I felt sort of that I didn't need to breathe anymore, I went into this completely other world. Everything was completely black. No matter if I opened my eyes or not, it was just black. And I just felt like everything had become one. I was everything, and everything was me, and there was no separation between any of these things.
It's
And
incredible. Did you feel scared at all during that moment?
no, because I was at so much peace with the non-breathing thing that I was just like, oh, like it just feels like I'm so centered and so grounded and just in my body, in my breath. And
Mhm.
so when I transitioned to that state, I was already in a very peaceful state. And so in this state, I was like, I have all these questions. What's happening? Like, what's life about?
Yeah.
And like, why was I born to my parents? And just why am I Asian? Like, well, just all these questions. And as soon as I had these questions, I had an answer. And as soon as I had more questions, I had an answer, until there was a point where there was just no point in asking questions, because it was just, and they weren't like really descriptive 10-page, essays with structure or anything. It was just really simple, just like, of course, this is why, type of answers. Like,
Uh-huh.
it's really simple, like you chose this, type of thing. And I was like, I don't know that that was an enlightening experience, but that was definitely an experience just taking a peek behind the veil of the matrix, or of this world, of the structure of this reality,
Yeah.
and that was so confusing for me, because I was like, what's real? I was like, did I just wake up from a dream? Is life a dream and this is where we go? Or is this just something of an imagination? So when I came back, I was still at a loss for words. How do you even describe, as a 12 or 13-year-old,
Yeah.
what this is like to anyone?
Exactly. Totally.
I think English was my second language, first of all, so that was an issue. And then my parents are immigrants from Vietnam, so that was an issue as far as just the cultural difference. And then so I couldn't talk to them about it, and then I couldn't talk to any of my friends about it, and I couldn't talk to my sister about it. So I had literally had nobody to talk to about it, and so that just led me into this really long and deep quest into trying to figure out what life is about and how I fit in. Because at that point, started to feel really alienated by my experience, because
Sure.
I was like, I just, I felt a little schizophrenic, like what's real and what's not. I don't know
Sure,
anymore.
totally,
All
yeah.
my dreams are real now. And I started beginning to have like really lucid, really powerful dreams. I'm like, I started remembering places in my dreams, just like I remember my friend's address or something. And when I go into a dream, like, oh, I'm here again. And it was just really confusing. I just had this long period, maybe like
Tim, how did you come out of that
20
transcendental
years.
meditation though? How did you come out of it?
Oh, it started actually, it's kind of faded on its own. And what was interesting was the beginning of the meditation, it was still daytime. It was probably about like 4 or 5 o'clock, I remember. But when I left the meditation, it was much later. It was dark. So it was maybe like 7 or something like this. So the experience itself, it felt brief, like super brief, like 5 minutes. But when I got out, I was shocked to find out that it's dark. And that was kind of off-putting too. I'm like, where did
Yeah,
I
what
go?
happened?
Where did
Where
I
did I
go?
go?
So everything was just, it was just, I was ripped from reality for a moment, brought somewhere, and then I was brought back and just sort of expected to figure it out on my own for the rest of my life.
So then after having that experience and feeling kind of like, as you said earlier, am I schizophrenic? What's reality? What's going on? Did I make this up? And then
Yeah.
you're having these vivid dreams. What was the next, what was the next transition in your life that catapulted you back into becoming spiritual again? And when did you catch up to that? And when did you actually, I mean, did you have like flashbacks about it, or does this kind of just stayed within you for years and years?
Yeah. Like I said, I felt like it was a really traumatic experience looking, looking back into that period of my life where I couldn't really relate to other, I don't know, I guess you can call them kids or adolescents at that time
Hmm.
because just all the gossip and all the talk about what's on TV or Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network or whatever. None of that really, it didn't sit with me anymore. And I couldn't talk about it because I was just like, you guys, these are just concepts. These are just distractions. You guys, we got to get to the root of reality here.
Yeah.
And so
That
it
would be
was just,
so frustrating. Oh my goodness.
yeah, I was very alone. So I think I had always started from that point. I started to write letters to myself because I thought I would forget about this experience. So I would just write letters to myself about how powerful that experience was, and that I can't forget that that was the root of, or like a cause for me to become something, to share something with the world, and that's what I felt like that was. And that continued, and I never really, I mean, my parents sent me to like meditation retreats, luckily, and so I learned properly how to meditate. And I wouldn't say that that was the beginning of the spiritual path, but I would say that all along the way until maybe I was like 25 or 26, I was in touch with that part of my life, but I wasn't aware of how profoundly it affected me in the negative until I was about 26 or 27, and I met my one of my teachers who really opened the gates for what spirituality could mean from from his experience and his embodiment of that. And what I mean by that is he he basically taught me spirituality without any of the new age terms. In fact, with no English at all. He only spoke Chinese and he had a translator. But he had a really, I would say, almost psychic ability to understand what's going on with you. And he basically taught me spirituality through love and this idea of what unconditional love could look like, what it could mean,
Yeah.
what how you relate that idea, how you share that thing with people, and how it is completely different from any idea that we could have about love or unconditional love. And that's my introduction into, I guess, this journey of spirituality. It's just really just sharing this highest quality of love that I can cultivate to people without them needing to deserve it or anything, just because I can and just because I feel like it's the natural thing to do.
So what did you learn unconditional love is?
That's a great question. That I I had to unlearn a lot of what I thought love was, and I grew up with Cinderella and Lion King and Aladdin and
Right.
those those ideas of love. And
Right.
so for me, I was a really intense lover, and I would always do extreme things to show somebody that I love them. And whether that's for me, it was like the most extreme form of love is like, I'm just gonna jump in front of you and like take the bullet for you, and like that's my dying, form of
Right.
love for you. And then I realized that it's it's a little bit more than that. It's for me at that time, as I was unlearning this stuff, it's not just one death that we have, but it's maybe 1,000 deaths that we have, and
Yeah.
and being okay with that, and knowing that that's part of the path of growth for me, at least. There's a lot of relationship between, I think, Stoicism and Buddhism, and I think one of the things that simplifies it for me is they say like the obstacle is the way, and right now, what's the obstacle to love? And so each obstacle is a death in a way, and I would just continue to learn through my teacher's actions because of what he would do in terms of the amount of effort that he would put in to show us
Uh-huh.
what it meant. And to tell you what it means is he basically just simplified it to good heart, have a good heart, and have kindness as a language of your spirituality.
I love this.
And so it starts from there. And then it starts from, okay, so what does it mean to be kind? And then he taught us what generosity is. It's not just, just giving freely, but it's really like, how do you think about, how do you consider, how do you create the conditions where somebody can easily and accept and receive your generosity?
Yeah.
And what is the form of that generosity? Well, that's dependent on the person, right? So like there's a level-based generosity, and then there's maybe a community-based generosity, and then there's like a world-based generosity, right? And so like there's different ways of like, how do I fit my constitution or my personality or what I have the means for into a way of kindness, into a way where somebody can receive it and they can receive it easily and effortlessly, not feel guilty, not say, oh no, I'm okay. Yeah, that's so great, but that's okay. Or, just it's like undetectably just slip it in and
Yeah.
allow them to just receive that as something beautiful and transformative. That was the lesson in generosity.
Can you give an example on that, like something specific on how you can cultivate this type of generosity and kindness so that everybody or a specific person can feel the purity of it and not anything else, such as like manipulation or like
Yeah.
yeah. Could you give an example?
Yeah. No, I love how you said the purity of it, because that's really what it comes down to. So yeah, I think an example is actually this weekend, right? So I was with a group of, people, a group of men at a retreat, and I was facilitating conversation. And it wasn't, I tried to think of things in terms of a thread and in terms of a flow. And I thought, well, this is a group of men who I feel lead their own communities and they lead their own families. And what is the best thing that I can give them? That it's not something that's beyond me. It's a body thing, right? So like, what is something that I know that I exude that lives within me that I an exemplar of?
I love that.
And how do I codify this thing in a way where they can take it as their own and really own that? And so I took this path of asking them what legacy meant to them and what was their relationship to it. And some people that was like, oh, this is just this generational thing. Some people was like, I don't believe in it. And some other people were like, oh, it's something that happens at the end of your life, and this is how people remember you. And then the next question I gave them was like, okay, so like, what was something that somebody gave you that that you can never pay them back for? And what that really means is, what did somebody give you out of love? Because naturally, it was just something unconditional for them to give you. And that's why you can't pay them back, right? Like if it's money, you can always pay somebody back money.
Sure. Right. Right. Right.
But if it's like there's a time in your life and you were going through something and they showed you, gave you an example, talked to you, they were there for you. And that through that conversation, there was enough meaning that was created that your life took a turn for the better.
Yeah.
Right. And
Right.
there's no way that you can be like, oh, thanks for taking me in for 6 months and helping me to figure out my life and then change it to this trajectory where I'm now an attorney or something. Right. So everybody had their own story, and it was really touching, like, because people really dug deep about the things that they had received that they can never pay forward or pay back. So I was like, okay, so how do you slip here? But how do you pay it forward? Right.
Yeah.
And then that connected to this legacy conversation. And really this conversation was about this unconditional love because when we experience pain, we
Yes.
can either put that out on somebody else, or we can take the lessons from that, do whatever forgiveness, do whatever healing, embody the lessons from that, and then become better than that so that that thing doesn't happen anymore. And then
Absolutely.
we're an
Yeah.
exemplar of overcoming that. And we can actually share that with other people. And it's not like it just, it's not as simple as just, you share this and they'll never make that mistake. But even just through story, even through just your way of being, it can inspire people to become like that so they never have to experience that. And
Exactly.
me sharing in this sequence, in this order, allowing these, this group of men to share with each other, these really touching moments of their lives, and then reconnecting that to, hey, look, like this is for me what spirituality is all about. And it's about a legacy in the now. It's about what you can do with what you have, what you've gained, what you've received from the space of gratitude, from the space of completeness, from the space of wholeheartedness, not from a space of agenda, not from a space of let me scratch your back and you scratch my back, but it's just
Exactly.
because you're complete, because you have enough to give, because your cup is so full, it just comes off of you effortlessly. But think about what the most valuable things that we can just naturally give are, and let's continue to give that. And so the way that I set that up is through generosity, right? It's just like, hey, like let's take a look at your life and let's share this. And let's create this container between all of us men where it just starts to overflow with these examples, and we can get really deep within ourselves. And how do we enrich these men now to step out into their lives and become a role model for what that meant for them and what this experience meant for them? And so that was my way of doing that.
I love that. It's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Hey,
Yeah,
so
of
you were
course.
sharing about love and how what are the lessons, the lessons that we can take from that. That way you can kind of like, I guess you an easier way to understand it for people listening to the first time, kind of like upgrade yourself. And
Mhm.
so, and then something else you said earlier, and I have a question in regards to how we can, if these two are the same. Earlier, you said the obstacle is the way. So if
Yeah,
we say that pain is the obstacle, pain is also going to be the way to, can you fill in the blank?
it's the way forward.
It's the
Because if
way
you
forward.
avoid the pain,
Yeah.
it'll just always be there. If you look away, if you imagine the hero's journey and it's about slaying this dragon, and I guess the hero's journey is about this story of completion, of becoming more than maybe what you were sheltered
Uh,
to be in your life, and then taking that back. And part of that journey is to slay this dragon, this ultimate obstacle, the final boss, or the last challenge. And so if you look away from the dragon, it's only going to get stronger. And I think this is why I'm not a clinical psychologist or anything,
that's all
but
right.
but if you have this dragon and you look away from it, I would imagine that the anxiety that you have about this dragon coming and burning down your town just
Yeah,
grows because you're not doing anything about it. But at least if you're doing some training, you're getting a little stronger, you're reading books on how to slay dragons or whatever that is,
sure.
then one day when that dragon comes, you're ready for it. Or if you're proactive, maybe you'll go out and you'll get a group of people or whatever, and you'll go do a quest and you'll go take care of the dragon.
Uh-huh.
And then you'll come back with that experience, with that wisdom, with those victories inside of your heart, and bring that back to the people and bring that back to inspire the children and the other men and the women in that community. And that's the whole journey of this beautiful becoming of a hero, and so I think when we're fearful of pain, I think that's natural, and I think it's also where if if that pain, if that sequence of events is so scary, there's probably a reason for that. And
Mhm.
the way to overcome that, the way to learn from that, the way to become better, and honestly, the way to not have to deal with it ever again
Yeah.
is to go in the direction of the pain
So if you go in the direction of the pain
or
and
the
you
fear.
or the fear, yeah, the fear of the pain, you're building momentum of courage. And in the light of courage, there's love. That is what I'm feeling right now as we're talking about this. Behind the feelings of courage is a push coming from inner love, correct?
Yeah, yeah, you definitely can't do without that.
So then once you have the courage to face the fear and face the pain, rather than hushing it down and storing it away and suppressing it, we're able to then open up doors to other possibilities and kind of plow through, slaying the dragon in a loving way. I guess slaying doesn't sound like a loving thing to do,
No,
but kind
yeah,
of
that's,
ridding, yeah, I don't really like the sound of that. Kind
we
of
can
ridding the
banish it.
dragon back to where it's supposed to be
Yeah,
and allowing peace, I guess welcoming peace. Is that a good way to understand it?
yeah. Um, I think if we use a different terminology instead of slaying, yeah, you're really just inviting, taking an attitude of inviting the obstacle into your life, into your conscious experience, so that you can integrate whatever's behind the fear.
Mhm.
And that's really the goal. Is it's there for a reason, and all we need to do is interface with it, engage with it, take the lessons from that, and integrate that. Because once it's integrated, it's not going to come back. That's my
How,
experience.
how do you know? How does one know that it's been fully integrated? And how can one trust that it's not going to come back?
I think the fear is an indicator of that. I think when you truly overcome an issue, so like I'll give you an example, a real world example. I remember when I was building my business about like 5 years ago, and I I probably am more risk averse. I mean, I'm probably more risk taking than most people, and I bet everything on this business. I sold everything I had basically, and put more of my savings than I should have into the business and into
Mm.
growing the business. And there was a point when the business wasn't doing well. I had an e-commerce business in the fitness industry, and we were selling stuff, and the business wasn't doing well. I was making like $2,000 a month, and I had no idea how I was gonna pay for new inventory because it's like a cash flow intensive business. And
Hmm.
I'm not gonna get into the specifics of business or whatever, but
Sure.
I had a lot of money tied up in the business. I was not getting a lot of income, and I had bills, and I had my rent due. And I was like, well, I don't know how I'm going to overcome this because I don't know how I'm going to pay for rent. And then I was really stressed out because I don't want to get kicked out of my house. And I don't. And so this is a really real fear for me, is like, oh, maybe I over indexed on my business and now I have nothing left for myself. And this is existential, right? Because like, oh, I'm supposed to be a business person. I'm supposed to be successful. And I have all this
Right.
like ego around it. And the reality is I don't even know how I'm going to pay rent.
Mm.
What happened was I ended up just asking people to borrow money, but I never wanted to do that because my identity was I am knowledgeable. I have a good track record of history at this point in business. And so me asking people to borrow money is against all that. I believed at the time that that would mean that I'm not as successful as I
Mhm.
came off. That would mean that I don't know what I'm doing. That would mean that I'm basically not worth respecting or admiration or love.
Yeah,
And
right.
so
Wow.
I had to overcome that. I had to humble myself in some ways, but I had to just be able to reach out to people and be like, hey, this is the situation. Like, can you help me out with the rent or whatever? And people came through. And I realized in this lesson that, first of all, like the worst thing that can happen is probably me losing my house and everything in it, to me at least. I mean, there's definitely lower things that can happen, but that's one of them. I think we're talking about Maslow, right? So like if we're talking about Maslow, that's probably one of the most fear-inducing things is losing your shelter, your safe place.
Mhm.
And once that fear had been resolved by just me being humble enough to ask other people, for help, then I was like, okay, so if I'm ever in the situation again, hopefully I'm never, but I have resources. I have people who care about me, and there's a way that I can make it happen. And even if I get into that situation again and nobody can save me, it's okay because I have my experience. I have what it takes to just come back. I know that. I believe that about myself now. So
Mhm.
I've been in that situation again a couple times after that. Probably I didn't learn my lesson in some way. I was over indexed and over invested on things that I should probably was taking too much risk in. But that same fear wasn't there because I knew that, hey, I can actually, I was actually really afraid to tell my parents about this because my parents, they're always really worried about me and just they didn't see me as successful because I didn't finish college, because I wasn't a doctor or whatever, right? And so I actually was able to, because this fear had been resolved, I was able to talk to my parents about this. Like, hey, there's this one time in my life where I didn't know how I was going to make it and I didn't want to ask you guys for help. And so, like, I was able to overcome that by myself. And that became, instead of something that I was shameful about, something that I was able to share with my parents where they were like, hey, we're proud of you for going through that, not feeling like you can rely on us, but know that you can because we do have money or, whatever.
Sure.
But it became like a bonding moment, and like that was the power in
So it
that, where
opened up
like
the
it
door
swung the
towards
whole.
closer bonding and more love, actually.
Yeah, and then that's what's on the other side of fear, right? And that's really what it is,
Yeah,
and
on
that's
the
on the
other
side of.
side of fear is love.
Yes, but we just don't see it because we have all these ideas, all these constructs of what it's gonna be like when we're out there and we're vulnerable. But then you see that, like, hey, like there's all this out there for you. That's there for you
I
to
love that
support you.
lesson. So you are a flow state coach. What is a flow state coach and what is flow state?
So that's a
Let's
great
start with
question.
the second question first. What is flow state?
I think everybody has a different experience of what flow state could be. For for the example that I think we can harken back to in this podcast is really in that transcendental state. I was in complete flow with the entire universe, and that it was the scale of which I was at flow, and that was a temporary experience. And I think we could talk about a more permanent experience in which we are sort of, I guess, to use another word, like in the groove or in the zone in sports. It's something that people talk about often, where like they know the shot's going to make it before they even shoot, or they have a sense for what their opponent or their opposing team is going to do, and they just everything is so effortless and so easy. And so those are moments in the flow, and those are more micro moments. And I think more globally in our life, it's really like how often are you coming into obstacles that are just really projections that you're creating within your own triggers that take you out of a flow that maybe it could be, you could relegate that to a flow of productivity, it could be a flow of love, it could be a flow of joy, whatever is taking you out. Those are the things that you need to, basically life is asking, calling you to pay attention to these things so they can be resolved, and once they're resolved, they can come back. So flow is just the effortlessness, the ease, and it's also defined by feeling disconnected from time. And so
Yeah.
when you have these elements, life really just happens on its own. And I think part of the meditative practice is to experience this, that you can take a little bit of that into your day and infuse that into sort of everything that you do when you're grounded in that space of connection.
What is flow state? Is that being in the state? And what I mean by that is that that with that question, like what is flow state? Is it being in a state of a type of meditative like transcendence at the moment? I'll give you an example. So I'm a poet.
Mm,
I started writing when I was 7 years old, and
nice.
it came so natural to me when I was seven. I was like,
Mm,
written language has always come so easily for me to this day. I mean, I've written thousands and thousands of poems, and they come to me so natural. Like, I
mm,
mean, it's flow state for me. And if I don't stop myself, I could probably write all night. And like you said, time, I mean, there's no time. It could be 2 hours, 3 hours, like 50 poems later, you know? And I'm like, where is this coming from? But I mean, and a lot of the times, like I don't have to think about it, and it literally just comes out. And so when I'm in that zone, I'm in bliss. I'm happy. And even if I'm transmuting pain, and let's say I'm heartbroken and I'm writing about it, I'm not in pain and I'm not heartbroken when I'm writing about it because it's
Yeah.
flowing out through me.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times I wonder, how can I get into that state when I'm writing in every other part of my life, when I'm communicating with people, when I'm hanging out, when I'm outside, when I'm with my mom, and if I could get into this type of state, then I could eliminate frustrations and stresses and anxieties and just self-deprivating stuff. So I mean, how can somebody get into this flow state more often?
Yeah, I think when you have a goal, it's also important to identify the anti-goals. And
Did you say
you
when
know,
you have a goal, it's important to identify the anti-goals?
yeah,
I've never heard it like that. What?
you have to.
Anti-goals? What's an anti-goal?
So in Buddhism, they talk about enlightenment, right? And so they talk about maybe joy, and they talk about maybe pain or suffering. So pain or suffering is probably the anti-goal, and the goal
Okay,
is
gotcha.
so yeah, you're starting to identify what you don't want, and
Okay.
that's okay. Like some people say, well, you're just giving that more attention, more power. Well, it's okay because you can actually look at, well, what are the relationships that I have with this thing? What are the causes? What are the conditions in which this thing happens? Can I minimize that? What are my things that I can do? Because if you can negate the things that you don't want, then that'll leave way more room for the things that you actually do want. And that's
Right.
kind of like the first, rule that I learned from Buddhism. So I think, you can use that situationally in terms of like productivity, really just like, okay, what is my intention for this 90-minute session or 1 hour session or whatever? Okay. What are some things that are my anti-goals? What are likely to distract me? Maybe it's my thoughts about my ex-girlfriend. Maybe it's my being on Instagram. Maybe it's, whatever those things are,
Sure.
commit to not doing those things. And then like what is like a way that allows you to get into the rhythm? Maybe it's like listening to good music. Maybe it's doing some breathing, whatever that is, like find out what that free routine is
Yeah.
and keep it the same every time. And that'll allow your mind to really set in a groove for you to just really just slide into that space. And so whether that's just getting up and dancing or doing breath work or whatever that is, you commit to doing that thing as a trigger for flow. And then you can condition yourself to have triggers for flow. And then you can take those triggers and you can apply them to other things. Maybe you apply that to working out now. Maybe you apply that to basketball, or maybe you apply that to before you're going to have a tough conversation with your partner or with your parents. And like, you're like, I'm just going to go in flow and just going to just try to infuse flow into my life so I can transfer this skill that I've been developing in the container of poetry or in the container of productivity. I'm going to start infusing into other areas of my life.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. And it makes sense. I mean, let's say that I'm listening to, because it's my favorite genre of music. And if I'm going to have a serious conversation, I don't know, with my mother, hypothetically, and if rather than getting serious and listening to serious stuff, get back into that flow of love, joy. And that's what I'm going to cultivate within the conversation.
Yes, yes, because it has to come from you. It has to come from you. Like if there's fear, that's going to come from you too, right? And whatever we're projecting, it didn't exist until we projected it. And so if we can generate that energy, that condition, that space, and that we have an idea of how we want it to end, then great. We can match those two things up, and that will allow us the best conditions for that final event that we want to arise. And not only that, we're affecting like the environment around us with the energy, the juju that we're bringing into it. And so
Yeah.
it can become even more than what we imagined. Or yeah, so
You said something awesome. You said nothing exists until you projected it. What do you mean by that?
that's another tenet in Buddhism. So it's like this idea of dependent origination. We call like there's a Zen koan. It says form is emptiness and emptiness is form. And so what that means is if you look at the five elements, or if you look at let's just say if you look at the five elements, or even look at, I don't know, in physics sense, I don't know, there's so many ways that I can describe this, but let me just pick one. Okay, so everything in nature has a ground that it sits on. So if you look at a tree has roots, and then those roots they sit in the soil, and that soil sits on something else in it. and it continues and it continues and it continues. And basically everything sits on something. And what is that something? It's at the end of the day, that's space, right? We can go into physics now and we say, it is said that, you know, inside of an atom is 99% space. So everything, although no matter how solid it appears, it's it sits on emptiness. And another example is we can use linguistics, and we can say that this chair behind me has four. A chair is defined by something with four legs. So what happens if I like just chop off one of the legs? Is it no longer a chair, or is it a
Right.
chair? Is it dependent on that definition, or is it dependent on something else? And so it's like all these things are just concepts, but they have to sit on something, and we need these things to be like operational. We need these things to communicate. But at the end of it, in the ultimate truth, everything is just what it is, and we're just putting labels on things. And so that is the projections that we're putting on things in the context where they're useful, but we also have to remember that in that context is where they exist until the context changes. And the context is always changing, but our minds are more rigid than that. And so we're thinking, mom, like you're the same way I was when I was 20, and you're just like this woman who's like really overbearing and really controlling, and you're always worried about me. But like, as long as we create a space for that to happen, then she, as our acting partner, is going to act that way. And so when we start to remove those things, then she's not going to act that way. And so like, there's just this interdependence that we have in this space of play that we have as these avatars in this, game of life or reality where it takes two to tango. And so the better you get at tangoing, the better it's going to make your partner, and vice versa.
Hey, so if everything is space and we put labels onto it and nothing exists until you project it, how is energy? What is energy in this case? Is it also empty space?
Yeah, I mean, we can look at this from a conversation in quantum physics, right? So there's something called the duality of a particle. So particle can either be, what we could say, energy can either be a particle or it can be a wave. And so, well, which one is it? And so that's why through this experiment, this foundational experiment was born, this idea of quantum physics. And so that basically says that, well, it's both. It just depends on what's happening, what's the context at that time. So that creates this duality in relationship between the subject and the object. And this is where they said, well, it depends on what the observer is expecting that creates the end result.
Okay.
And so it can be both, and it's also one or the other. Mm-hmm. Sorry, what was your question again, more specifically?
So I'm just wondering, how does energy exist within space if everything, if we put labels to everything and inherently everything is space and energy is alive, how is energy alive within the space of nothingness?
Energy is alive within the space of nothingness. Energy to me is a delta. So like if you think about how, this is a good example actually. So if you're walking on the beach and you feel the wind, you ask the question, well, where's the wind coming from? Well, it's coming from, I don't know, the sky, I guess, right? And it's like, well, where does it start and where does it end? Well, I don't know. And you can use this as an example to really look at your emotions too, because like, where do emotions come from? And like, it comes from like the vastness of your mind, like, which is representative of the sky. And in some way, we can use physics to describe like, oh, the wind comes from like, high areas of high pressure going into areas of low pressure, which creates this delta, which creates this wind, right? And yeah, but like that doesn't really answer like where does it start and where does it end? And I think that's where the construct of the mind starts playing games with us to try to quantify things that aren't really quantifiable in that way. Like I can't tell you like in this vector of space is where the wind began, and then this is where it ended, because it began way before that. Like like how do I trace like the cause of humanity to like where did the first human come from? And like you can go back to this chicken or egg problem, right? And it's like, well, it's the continuation of conditions that create the situation itself. And I guess to go zooming back into your question of like, how does energy sit in space? I think I don't want to make this too much about physics or anything, but like energy can't be really created or destroyed, right? It's just recycled.
Right.
And so like everything that we're doing is creating more energy, more waves, right? I think water and is a really good way of representing energy, because if you look at like a wave, like where does a wave come from? And it's well, it comes from like maybe it comes from this boat that just came by and they created like all this
Sure.
wake, and then this wake created this wave, and so it, the inside of a system, there's always a certain amount of energy, and it's just being recycled and transmuted. So in a way, we can look at the situation where we're creating poetry,
Yes.
and we could just say, where's the poetry coming from? Maybe part of
Yeah,
it's
I
coming
want to
from your
know.
pain. Maybe part of it's coming from your experience. Maybe part of it's coming from your pain. And maybe in some beautiful way, it's turning into words through those expressions that you've taken into your body, into your mind, into your heart, and you're able to transmute through your hand into words and look at and share with other people.
Yeah.
But like it wouldn't those that poetry wouldn't have existed without those experiences inspiring you in some way to put them together to share with yourself or with other people.
So nothingness turns into somethingness when there is feeling attached to it, which feeling is energy, and then we make something out of that based on our own personal experience. We can make some nothing into something.
That's the projection. Yeah, totally.
I
That's it.
love that.
Because like that, a projection is an interpretation, right? It's a filter of interpretation, right? So if you have these experiences when you're, I don't know, 10 or 12 and they're, your formative years of 6 or whatever, and you're like, okay, when these people are doing this with each other, they're probably fighting,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, but maybe like in this culture, like doing this like a way of showing you're excited and you're happy to see them or something, right? And so maybe you just projected that out there and that doesn't exist except for you and you. And now you're like, oh, I feel so scared. I feel so much fear, right? And so like things are empty until we try to interpret them. And that's what I mean by emptiness. It's another way of looking at emptiness is like the interpretation is what gives it meaning, but that interpretation is entirely subjective based on our personal experiences, based on our culture, based on how we we're raised, based on our filters for how we look at reality. And the process of meditation for me has been removing those filters so I can see things as they are and I can live life without expectations of how things should be, or because those expectations are also what set up disappointment, that set up pain, and they sort of pigeonhole us into a certain experience of life that it should be like this. And if it's not like this, then I feel bad, I feel guilt, I feel shame, or whatever. And we're really opening up more degrees of freedom, more degrees of ways of being that allow us to have a stable and clear and sharp mind that allows for the space of unconditional love to come out. Because if you're feeling, attacked, if you're feeling shame, if you're feeling fear, it's very hard to be in a vulnerable state, right? We're going to be more like tight. We're going to be in our fight or flight, right? So it's like, how do we open
Yeah.
up more degrees of expression, more ways of being, so that we can be in all types of situations and not feel triggered by them and not feel triggered to see things a certain way more than what they
I
are.
love this. I feel like I can continue to ask you questions and questions on this, but there's just so much. I could just talk about this forever. It really opens me up and it just keeps me fired up. I love it. So you are a flow state coach and you focus on helping people, purpose-driven high performers excel. How do you do this?
Right now, I'm working on a program for sleep, and so I'm creating a flow program because as much as we live in this world, of hustle, of getting things done, I talk about this in terms of working out. I think sometimes people can relate better. It's like when you work out, you're tearing your muscles, but you're not actually getting stronger. I mean, there's gains happening. You're like, oh yeah, I'm getting stronger. And maybe you're developing the neural drive to contract more muscle, but technically you're tearing your muscles and you're actually weakening the system. And so when you actually get stronger is when you're sleeping. That's when the growth hormones are released. That's when your body is making those muscles not only stronger and more resilient, but it's also making them bigger, right? Like making them bigger doesn't happen while you're just walking around, like hanging out with your friends, drinking a
Right,
beer or
right,
something,
right.
right? And so that's also when all your sex hormones, your testosterone, your estrogen, like having your sleep in order sets the ground for the foundation of your energy, your productivity, your mood, how you show up in your relationships, how you show up in your work, how you feel in your body from moment to moment. And so I felt like flow is such a big, vast thing that you're asking about energy and all this stuff. And it's like that's how big it is. It's like we can turn it into like a micro 90-second, 90-minute practice, and you can turn that into how you can transmit that and transfer that into all aspects of your life. But I wanted to make it in a way that's very digestible and very singular in its approach to help people. Let's get into a sleep flow. So let's trigger your body to learn that it's time to sleep. So that when it's time to sleep, it takes you 15 minutes or less to shut down. You get a like really beautiful 90-minute REM cycles. You sleep for 8 hours, you sleep like a baby. You wake up, you're not tired, and you can just go into your day and have a beautiful day. So that's like the first part of flow that I'm developing right now. And it's going to build out into other aspects of health so that I think it's more relatable in a very physical sense. It's more appeal. I think I like a higher appeal in terms of um, allowing people to engage with a sense of flow by removing the spirituality. And if they want to, like there will be a path of ascension. But I think the most easy and basic thing is just to take care of our body. I think the first way that we can learn love in any form is through ourselves and self-love, self-care. And so I think there's a really beautiful relationship between that and what we do in our in our work life or our careers.
So is 8 hours what we should be getting every night?
Everybody's different. It's really personal. I think ideal is 8 hours, to be honest, especially if you're physically active. Definitely you need time for your muscles to develop and time for your fat to burn, because that happens while you're sleeping as well. So, but everybody's highly individual. So it could be, I think, ideally anywhere between 6 and 8 hours. There's been a lot of studies that are conflicting, but it's just within that range would be optimal.
It's really fascinating about how sleep definitely heals the body. I recently just about 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with two different sleep apneas, which means that I stopped
Mm.
breathing two different ways.
Oh my goodness.
Obstructive, I know it's called obstructive sleep apnea and centralized sleep apnea. So once the obstruction happens, I stop, then the brain comes in, the second sleep apnea, and goes into this like flight and fight panic mode. It's like, oh my God, you're not
Hmm.
breathing. Well, let's shut you down even more.
Yeah.
So it's like I had two different sleep apneas, and I'm certain that I've had it my whole life, and that's actually what activated my genetic disease and kind of just kept going because I
Mm.
didn't grow, I couldn't gain weight, and I was working out really hard. I couldn't gain muscle. So it's only been a little over 2 years with this machine that I sleep with every night, and now I can do probably a good 5 hours with it on. And ever since then, lo and behold, I'm sleeping and I'm thriving now. On the disease is on remission, and I just have more clarity. My meditations are clear.
So
Everything is
beautiful.
more clear. So, I mean, sleep is very important. And uh, I just wonder sometimes if we need the full 8 hours, because I feel pretty good at 6. So I think it really, like you're
Hmm.
saying, it really depends on the person and how that kind of like just kind of like gets you ready for your day, for especially a full day.
Yeah, it also depends on how much light we experience too, because if you take out, I don't know, like the last 200 years of modern technology that takes out the light bulb, which means that the sun really was the sort of all powerful being that told us when to go to sleep and when to wake up. Because
Yeah,
when the sun comes
right.
up and it's like warm and it's hot or whatever, it's like okay, like it's like this is not right. And so like that was what was natural, and we moved away from that, which is okay. I don't really have a stance on that, right? Because everything's empty. But
Right.
I really just encourage people to really connect with the sun, because that's actually how we evolve. Like that's like there's such a relationship between all of our hormones. There's so much of our hormones that are relegated and regulated, sorry, by the sun. It's just a huge part of our life that now we're kind of indoors and we don't really get to experience. And so part of not sleeping a full 8 hours, I think, is most people they don't see the early parts of the sun or the late parts of the sun, which really regulate our body, our circadian rhythm.
Mhm.
And once you do see both parts, you'll be amazed to see what changes in your sleep, both parts of like the sunrise and the sunset.
That's beautiful. I was having a tough time. I'm in California, and the month of June was literally June gloom, so bad,
Yeah.
and it was like
Yeah.
bringing me down. It was like the same. It felt like Groundhog Day. It was like 5 a.m. all day, and I was like, working out, still walking and stuff, but I couldn't produce like these happy chemicals that I naturally do when the sun is bursting out, like it is right now, thankfully. And
Yeah.
it became very challenging when it was just so gloomy every day. I actually couldn't wait for it to be nighttime because at least there was a change in the day and it became nighttime after that. It's really
Yeah.
fascinating. I
Well,
have,
there's something called seasonal affective disorder, right? And that
yeah,
a lot of people,
exactly.
like a lot of people experience that as depression. So that's a real thing.
Totally. So we're running out of time here, but I do have a couple questions. You're talking about, I was looking at your biography here and you talk about biohacking. What is biohacking?
Yeah, it's an art and a science of affecting your physiology and optimizing it using both supplementation or protocols and practices to get the outcomes that you want, whether that's better sleep, whether that's more muscle, whether that's less fat, whether that's uh, fixing your vision without using corrective surgery, whether that's um, it could be anything really. So it's really just like how do you affect your health using um, the body of evidence that's out there, using the research, using supplementations, using foods um, to improve your quality of life to the fullest. And that's really been central to me because not like you, I don't have a really extensive history in the hospital, but I did lose my gallbladder when I was 6, and that really stunted my growth because that's the main, I guess, little sachet of your digestive system. And so I wasn't processing foods at a very high level. And I was in high school, I was like 4'11" and like 80 pounds. So I grew since then, luckily. But not that there's anything wrong with being that size. But it's been a real struggle. And so with my health. And so that really launched me really deeply into how it's almost like this quest for immortality at this point that I have. I actually, at the end of this whole like health thing, I want to do an offer to help people reverse their biological age, which that is dependent on sleep. And so like this is one of the first pillars that I'm approaching to this entire process that I'm creating. I'm masterminding this whole thing. But to answer your question, um, I went really deep and I spent countless ADHD fueled hours on research and it's just something that I'm really passionate about. So it's been quite a journey, but it helped a lot of people. So I'm really happy about that.
This is awesome. I love your goals. I love your visions. I love where you're headed. I love your energy. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom light, your story, and your flow state incorporation with everything that you do. How can our viewers, our watchers, and our listeners find you if they would love to connect the flow state coach such as yourself?
Yeah, I have a Instagram. I have a website. My website is my name, which is Timden Bowie, just .com website. So maybe the link, the spelling for that can be in the show notes. I don't want to do the whole alphabet name, but
Sure.
it also
Yeah.
that's the same as my Instagram, which is where you can find a lot of free resources. I have like a link in my bio, and it usually has like videos on how you can learn how to like remove all of the sort of triggers using breath work that you have through something called biofeedback breathing, which you can use a device to actually measure and see what your heart rate variability is. You can change that. Low heart rate variability is correlated with cardiovascular disease and high levels of stress. And so now you have a tool to really live a life with much less stress just by breathing. So that's really cool. I have, a flow template that's very similar to the one that we discussed to create a container to learn how to get into flow. And so I tried my best to give as much free resources as possible because I feel like that's really important. But I think if people wanted to, work on a one-to-one basis and get that direct attention from me, then there's, opportunities for that as well. But I just really want to just give like the 80-20, like the most effective things out for free as much as I can. So that's really what's on my Instagram through my link in the bio.
That's really beautiful. Tim Bowie, everybody, flow state coach. Thanks so much for flowing with me and for flowing with our listeners and for flowing with the world. You're an incredible light. Thanks for sharing your love and have a blessed, beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's been beautiful flowing with you.
It really has. Thank you so much.